Excellent. I'm so excited, and I'm also so happy that there's somebody else who has such a difficulty with Instagram that I do.
I know I'm the low on technology person, but we've got used to Zoom, but somehow haven't got used to this as yet. So
That's fine. It's just another way to, it's just another platform. But I am absolutely delighted to have you on Sai Shiko for what is going to be a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. Anything to do with curiosity and education is always of interest to me. Yeah.
Vera ma'am, I'd first like to introduce you to our audience. You have been teaching at the American School for now. Please tell me exactly how many years before I get the statistics wrong.
I'm going to start my 27th year in August.
Wow. Right. So you have taught at the American Embassy School for 27 years. You have seen, multiply as many brains as I can. Every batch after batch, you've seen multiple students, multiple learning styles, so many parents. You've also taught a very interesting subject called theory of knowledge, which is, I think, unique to IB in the sense that it really explores not what we need to know, but how we need to know it. So you're our perfect candidate to discuss curiosity. And I want to really just thank you again and, begin with a question around what do you think curiosity is? In your personal definition, what do you think curiosity is?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's a desire to explore ideas and take ownership of your own learning. That's the key.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, and Veera ma'am, in the context of academic learning, we work with children over the age of 13, where this idea of curiosity and responsibility kind of go together, which is to take ownership of your learning. But why do you think curiosity is so key to learning over a period of time?
I think it prepares the brain for learning, and then once you're prepared for learning, it makes further learning far more enjoyable and rewarding. Mm-hmm. I think he is the uncertainty piece in curiosity. So the moment something is predictable or certain, then it loses that charm for students. So you talk a lot about growth mindset, and I was thinking a dangerous mindset is certainty. Then there's no to explore. So the thing is, it's this whole idea of uncertain. I can see a few of my students are logged in too. So I know that the key is that there is no right answer. Let's explore. And for everything that's true, you should be able to argue largely, especially in a subject theory of knowledge, that the reverse is true too. So I think that in that lies the crux of the idea that when there's uncertainty, then curiosity is aroused and you're wanting, it's a challenge. Like, you're a mother too, I'm a mother too. Unless you challenge children, they don't, even like if when they come back from school, how is school, it was fine. If you ask the right questions, did this happen today or whatever, then you'll get a response. So the key, I think, is the open-ended questions. And that's why I value and appreciate the IB a lot. Because besides theory of knowledge, I teach history. There is, we are told, unlike in the national curriculum, which I wrote, where they would ask you the causes of something and you just had to say all the causes. Here, they never ask you that. They'll ask you open-ended question. So my students would ask, for example, to what extent was economic factors a cause of the war?
No, Veera ma'am, you've touched on so many aspects already in your initial response, but I want to go back to the brain and uncertainty. Actually, all the research that I've been doing around evolutionary psychology, around, why is somebody curious? It was actually the fact that, animals and man had to look for food. And the search for food and the uncertainty around not having food is really truly how the brain evolved. So the curious cat is actually not a negative statement. It is, if you're not curious enough to where you're going to get your food, the brain is not alert enough to actually go and fill the gaps in information. And I think that's so critical. And you also referred to this idea that, in teaching and learning, an open-ended question is possibly the best way to cultivate curiosity, because again, research is showing, look, it's innate, but the challenge that parents and educators have is, okay, how do I cultivate it? And I want to hear more from you on formulating the right kind of questions, because there is intrinsic motivation in students. Some are curious, some are not. But how do you make somebody more curious by asking the right questions? Just in your experience as a teacher, how have you done that in the classroom?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I talk a lot about this, about questioning techniques, because I think all teachers are these days being trained in that. So, for example, when you say what was the cause of something, that is not an open-ended answer, but yeah, a question. But if you say to what extent was, or how far, or uh, yeah, basically your what we call command terms for questions should be right. So in TOK, for example, we would, or can new knowledge be established? Does new knowledge change values or beliefs? How can we know that current knowledge is an improvement on past knowledge? That kind of thing is, you're saying to a student that maybe it's an improvement, maybe it's not. You tell me what you think. And it lends them to, and we insist most times as teachers that, and that's true in the adult world too, in real life, that no matter how strongly you feel, you should be able to argue that the reverse is true too. They're always the...
Veera ma'am, yeah, talk a little bit more about this open-ended question versus just a question, because I think there is a nuance there that, even parents don't kind of really acknowledge, what is a good question and what is a superb question, and why does that matter to build curiosity?
Yeah. So
give me an example.
Yeah. Again, when you ask a what or why question, you get a narrative answer, because what you're saying is you studied something in class and now say it out, right? So you studied the French Revolution, and now I'm asking you what were the causes. So you say economic, political, social, whatever. Now, when you say to what extent was the social factors of cause, what you're doing to students is you're saying, okay, they're asking me social, so let me talk about social, but I don't agree with that. So I'm going to argue in my thesis that actually social factors were there, but political factors were the biggest cause. So now you're building an argument, you're working on many parts of the Bloom's taxonomy on higher level thinking, for example, because you're not just asking a student a question that they could have read a textbook, memorized it and answered. They cannot answer that because you've nuanced the question. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Veera ma'am, it's very interesting. I want to go back to the brain again, because one of the challenges that we have as coaches is that parents and even when we are doing workshops with teachers say, well, motivation is either there or not. It's largely intrinsic, and that's where the debate ends. And since I can't cultivate anything other than that, I'm lost on any child. And what I find interesting is that we need to figure out a way that, everything that we study is not something that we are passionate about. And within the larger curriculum, how do you, have a technique, and you've taught for 27 years, to invoke some part of curiosity even within a subject that is not very exciting to a student? How do you do that? How do you achieve that?
Yeah, so I think 2 or 3 techniques. One is
Yeah.
storytelling. Storytelling always excites students. My students always say, oh, no story today. Tell personal stories, tell stories about others, something that generates your thinking. The second thing is predictions. When you're seeing students about saying, okay, let's predict what will happen. Or then, so there are people who predict this will happen versus that, why did you do that, that sort of thing. So what we do is we employ these methods. The moment you see kids are losing interest, introduce something like that, introduce a control. Controversies are always interesting, because
Yeah.
it's asking you to think.
Vera ma'am, you're right. And actually, the emerging research around this is actually spot on from what you've experientially seen over 27 years. There is a professor over at Harvard called Elizabeth Bonowitz, and she studies curiosity. And she's of the opinion, of course, that you can only cultivate it. But she does say that some of the techniques that could work very well in classroom is to sort of highlight ambiguity. When you don't give the answer, there is a bulb that goes off, because now it's the responsibility of the student to fill that gap. And to help students actually be confused is actually great. Because once again, the sort of brain is responding to uncertainty to plug the gap. And the predictions, I think I want to talk a little bit more about predictions. I think, when we get children to generate their own prediction and engage with sort of assumptions in the world. And I think, in education, they call it pedagogical questions. But how have you done that? I mean, you've taught history, which, has been taught in such a passive manner over a period of time. How have you taught history, which is documented, agreed upon, but really challenging people to view history from a different lens, not accept what was written in a textbook?
Yeah. And so now, unlike when I grew up, I want to clarify, Vinati, I have been teaching for 40 years. It's 27 years at American school,
Wow.
But I've been teaching before that. But yeah, I think
Yeah.
the thing is to teach students not to accept what they're reading. And how do we do that? Because we are constantly evaluating sources. We are saying, let's look at why did a person write this? What was their own context? What did they have an agenda? The moment you tell students that, they said, yeah, of course, this is a nationalist, or he's a communist historian. So clearly he's talking about those philosophies and so on. So I think the key is to teach students, and like you put it on your side, to don't believe the written word. And my favorite example is the Holy Roman Empire, right? In history, it was not holy, it was not Roman, it was not an empire. In Germany, it started as uniting the Catholic states, but it wasn't an empire. So once kids learn that, they start, this is another thing to question. Who said it, why did they say it? And then you do what we call reliability assessment. So first you identify the source, then you identify the perspective, and then you corroborate it. So what we say is, like when I was growing up, I used to study one textbook and I just believed it, right? Nobody taught me that, hey, you don't have to believe this. So now we say we never study any topic from one. Any topic in any subject, you must have multiple sources to study it so that you can check, what is true and not. Even then, we don't always arrive at the truth, but at least we are closer to it.
Yes, ma'am, and I can't remember who said it, but I did hear once that history is nothing but a fable agreed upon, and I couldn't, I was like, really? I mean, we are being graded to know the truth, which is one, from one historical text, and as layers are revealed, you realize that there is entire contextual knowledge that has been missing over a period of time. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how do you see students, you've taught for 40 years, you've seen, what is the difference between somebody who is pushing their thinking? What are the traits of these students versus somebody who is not pushing their thinking just yet and is okay with the first level of information that the curriculum descends? How do you distinguish between some of these students? You've seen so many over a period of time.
Yeah, and I would say the key is in the questioning. Again, I have said this before, but you ask the right interesting questions, you'll get much better responses. You ask a boring question or a close-ended question, which is doesn't the thing is, in TOK we call it contestable. Everything should be contestable, only then you have an argument. So when you're asking somebody, what was this? What were the reasons for climate change? They're saying, here are the reasons. But if you're saying to, was this the most significant reason? Then you're asking kids to prioritize again all the higher level skills. Then you're making them think that way. Another thing, since you had asked me about history, which I wanted to say last time, is this whole thing of controversy. Like, I mean, even Gandhi in India is a great leader, a lot, but you know what? He was not multifaceted. Like, we can't expect him, he comes under controversy, but we can't expect him to be good at all the things. And even in the things he did, you have to recognize that it's like in the Indian nationalist textbook, they'll say Gandhi fought for independence. And another perspective is independence came when it was an age where for decolonizing. So, to what extent was the struggle by the Indian leaders had this not happened? And then we asked them to visualize scenarios. Suppose there was no struggle, will India still be under the British? Not really. So, what importance should we give to that struggle? And that's the kind
Yeah.
of concept that generating good thinking.
So I want to just pick up that word, this sophisticated good thinking, this metacognition, almost higher order skills. The National Curriculum Framework is now asking for that to be built in. It's a difficult thing to teach unless you do these other things, which is that you develop a whole, you have multiple sources of teaching the same idea or an event. And I always wondered, as a student who was interested in politics and policy, that why our class 11 or class textbooks were not teaching the constitutional debates so that we could build up our own ideas, because it was even the nation forming was heavily debated between the founding fathers. And why did we teach just the outcome, that this occurred on midnight? And I think that's and that's exactly where I think we are unable to develop higher order thinkings unless we have multiple texts coming in. This good thinking, and now I think in the workforce, the pushback has begun, where they're saying, we want original thinkers, we want creative thinkers, we want curiosity, we want decision making, we want perspective. So the entire teaching, I want your view on what is the difference between a facilitator as a teacher who provokes questions versus somebody who delivers curriculum. Where do you see that? How is that different? When does an educator make that shift, and how do they make it?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, because for the longest time, teachers, including me, when I started teaching, looked at ourselves as on the stage. So we are not doing our job unless we are talking for that 45 minutes and imparting knowledge, because, hey, this is my job. Now, then you move to this whole idea of the teacher's the guide on the side, that person is facilitating them. And then this whole idea of constructivist theory, which says that I can, again, like I said, the lessons we teach in school, that we teach in school are not the lessons the students are learning. We don't know what they're exactly learning. Their brain is functioning differently. So just recognizing that students are constructing their knowledge based on their own, past experiences, no matter what I'm saying. Once we recognize that, the more we can get them to collaborate with each other in groups, much more better learning would happen that way. Second thing is this whole idea that I call it's a Latin word called tabula rasa. It's not a blank slate. When I teach history, this was a period of war, this was the period, this was the period when the British colonized India. You know what? 500 years independent of the British. So are we generalizing, like we are thinking that the whole of India was colonized by British? So the thing is, this is not their own dynamic happening. For back that's happening, to own dynamic. So once you recognize, and another thing is when you're teaching students whose English is not the first language. So when I'm saying colony, for example, a student has heard of defense colony or an area. So they're identifying it with a residential colony. They're not making that connection. So to be mindful of that too, that I have to be conscious that students make connections based on what they understand. That collaboration is the key, because when they can collaborate
Yes.
I break up topics. I say, you teach it. When I'm teaching it versus a student teaching it, it's far more powerful. So this is what, these are kind of techniques.
Veera ma'am, yeah, I want to take away that phrase, guide on the side versus performance in classroom by the teacher. And tabula rasa, that it isn't, generalization is I think, the laziest form of any engagement with any new knowledge when you generalize. And this idea of collaboration, again, in the workforce, we're hearing again and again, people don't collaborate. Like there's corporate trainings that go on around collaboration, and it begins right there in the classroom, where you can co-create knowledge because you have a different perspective or a style, or even a different resource from which you're bringing subjects to bear. And I want to ask you a little bit more around the facts of the classroom now. The facts are that there is a curriculum to finish. The facts are that there is an examination to be had. So how does an educator balance this, sort of deeper achievement on higher order thinking, on collaboration, and finish the curriculum? Because there's just such tension between finishing the curriculum, prep for exam, versus achieving what an educator, ideally would like to, which is higher order thinking, metacognition, creating the capacity in a student to have a perspective, have an argument, search for other sources. How do you balance that?
Yeah, it's always a tough challenge, more so in the senior classes where, the students would go for an external exam. So I would say if this whole process starts from elementary school, so we have in our school students who come straight out of some traditional curriculums, they come into the 11th grade. It's very tough for them. But the kids who've been in a system which is encouraging curiosity and so on, it's much easier for us to work with them, because the traditionally educated students are looking for just writing the answers and learning. But the students who've been through this process, it becomes much easier, because they understand that actual learning will happen even if we don't finish all parts of the curriculum. It's easier to read it on our own, but so long as we get what we're doing, we get the basic skills, not the content so much. So the thing is on discovery rather than uncovering. Just you're discovering things, not uncovering. It is tough, because sometimes, towards the end we do run out of time, and then we tell the students some of this is the kind that you can read on your own, but you know what, you learned the skills that prepared you for that. So we are sure that they would.
Yeah. Veera ma'am, in your opinion, how does curiosity or the skill to close gaps in your own information impact the lives of students beyond academics, in their personal growth, in their creativity and problem solving? How does curiosity kind of impact your life going further than being a student?
And in fact, I believe this very strongly, because I see it all the time outside of academic achievement too. I think, like you touched upon this, firstly, curiosity helps us survive, right? Because environment, and then brains evolve rather to do the survival. But curious people definitely seem happier, and they are more empathetic. I've been quite involved with service learning too, and I just find that there's those who that empathy just be about people you're interacting with. When you ask those questions, you get more empathetic. So rather than talk about yourself, our students who try to understand about others that they're interacting with outside of school, we find so much empathy that builds. So that's a very good question you asked me. I think it strengthens relationships when you're curious, because even in a party situation or whatever, where you're meeting people, you want to know more about them, it strengthens that. And I was reading on how even healthcare improves. Even doctors who are curious about their patients, they do much better than saying, okay, quickly tell me what you have, and then here's, the answers. So I would say curiosity plays a big role in outside of academic achievement.
So it's so interesting, the connection that you're drawing between curiosity and empathy, because again, parents almost ask us all the time and workshops and teachers, how do you build empathy? And I'll be able to go back and say, hey, build some curiosity, and by the sheer understanding of a different perspective, you may actually then build some empathy. And I think in political conflict resolution kind of scenarios, this is often the case where, unless you've really gone on the other side and been curious about their experiences in political negotiations on conflict resolution, where conflict has existed for so many years, that level of empathy is not built. But this link between being curious and being empathetic, I think, is spot on. And research is also showing, ma'am, that curiosity is actually a fantastic way to build patience, because if you don't have this answer yet, you do then have the patience to figure it out over a period of time. And recently I was just looking at the net, and I saw that Bill Gates has launched a podcast called Unconfused. And I think that's just a fantastic title, because he says, the whole process of unconfusing yourself to draw the dots, and he's curious around certain ideas, including, say, Alzheimer's, which has got so much to do with the way our brain functions. And it's almost as if students should be given brownie points to say, I didn't get it. I still don't get it. I'm not being able to get it. I'm not being able to understand how this happens. And sometimes in the classroom, I think we, to be able to proudly say, I don't get it, is a stigma. Where again, learning begins at not knowing. Learning begins at being confused. So it's fascinating that you're drawing this connection between curiosity and empathy. And then, of course, it takes you so much further if you have that curiosity and empathy in your work and student life, in your working professional life later on. I want to ask you a little bit more about how you've experienced brain health and curiosity in students. What connections have you drawn there?
Yeah, I think the more curious you are, like I said, I feel like the brain gets ready for learning when you're curious, right? And
yeah.
I would say one thing, this not directly answer this question, but I thought of it while you were talking. I wanted to say, when you asked me techniques and what do educators do, one thing is that I try to do, and a lot of my colleagues, we sort of let students know that we don't know all the answers, when you're asking. So don't feel scared to ask the question, because I don't know the answer to. So quite often, to make students comfortable in the beginning, we just say, we don't know, let's try and figure this out together. Or we genuinely don't know. But that vulnerability, where that makes the student very comfortable, as against, like when you said there's a stigma associated with asking the questions. So the stigma is associated with not asking the question in a good classroom environment. If you're not asking questions, you're not involved enough. So, but also this thing of brain health by saying, let's discuss. Everybody thinks this is true. Today, let's just discuss all the reasons why this might not be true. And it's because that will stimulate students' interest versus saying, we know this is true, prove to us how. We are saying, okay, what might not have been true with this. So I think the brain expands, like Einstein said, right? I'm not a brilliant person, I'm just curious. I'm all the time curious. And I would add to that, my favorite line is to be perpetually curious. When you see students who are perpetually curious, and I smile sometimes as I'm going through the hallway, and I'm just seeing the same students asking questions all the time. And I'm thinking, this is where learning is really happening, outside the classroom.
Yes, so this perpetual curiosity, now I want to go back to brain health. I just wanted to cite some research. So they did this research in California Davis, University of California Davis in 2014, where they essentially asked participants to rate their curiosity on a certain subject. So, are you interested in who's the first president of the United States, or what does the term dinosaur really mean? And what they did afterwards, ma'am, was they lay these participants down in, in an fMRI brain scanner, and they presented the same questions later. So the effects of curiosity on later recall was striking. So when participants were highly curious about a fact, there was a 30 or 40% more likely chance for them to recall it. And what they discovered was that this was corresponding to heightened brain activities in the midbrain, where dopamine is produced. And it was actually associated with reward. Now, the intriguing thing was that if curiosity can build new neural connections, then it's actually even adding to the ability of students to memorize more, because whatever you may say, memory is a key part of the academic experience. That is not everything you're interested in, but you have to memorize. So curiosity, which is easier to almost cultivate than memory, can actually lead to better memorization in case you get curious about one part of the curriculum. So how have you seen that play out? Curious students better at memorizing? Are they better academically overall? How is that in your experience of 40 years been? What are the traits of these students? Perpetual curiosity leading to, how do you see that?
Yeah. So I have I want to just talk for a minute about
Sure.
he says, how do people learn, right? And how do you know what you know? That's what we are constantly asking. He said, many ask them, tell me, how do you know this? They would say, told me, or my teachers told me, but we said you must go beyond that and say, yeah. So they have all these 8 traits, of how we know, of knowing, we call it. So there's sensory perception. That's our first knowledge, what you see or hear or tell. But then you realize, and there's language, of course. But there's things like intuition, imagination, memory, emotion, reason, and memory. That's coming now to your question on memory. What I didn't know that curiosity increases your memory skills, but I do know that what I do say, memory learned is a sort of protein. The more you remember something, the less accurate it might be, because every time you remember it, you lose a little bit. So they say, in the patients, for example, they don't recall a memory of what happened in 1964, but they don't remember if they ate yesterday. But because they have, if they haven't recalled it, but if you keep recalling something, that memory is distorted. As we know, in eyewitness cases, rapists and so on, they accuse somebody wrongly because it's traumatic. They had thought so much about it. So yeah, I think curiosity to me is very interesting, that it increases memory, but it's more interesting that it increases understanding. So what we are saying, understand, you don't, if you figure it for yourself rather than believing in that written word, then you're more likely to remember it.
Yeah, it's interesting actually. You're spot on over there. I was having a conversation with a biology teacher, IB biology teacher once, and she was at the wrong end of receiving, there's so much information. And we were discussing exam anxiety, and she said, I wish I could tell my students that I would really like for them in that moment to draw from comprehension than from memory, because memory and the hippocampus can be hijacked very, very quickly, but sort of approaching a paper or that moment from comprehension, they're more likely to be able to calmly retrieve information. So curiosity's role in driving comprehension, curiosity's role in driving empathy and memory. They're still trying to figure out all the mechanics of how curiosity can be cultivated over a period of time. Just towards the end of our conversation, ma'am, what do you suggest for, again, we always have like 3 stakeholders. We've got parents, we've got teachers, and we've got younger folks. Like, what would be your message for educators to build curiosity in the classroom, for parents to, maybe make their own questions more sophisticated, and for students itself, where every teacher is not inspiring, every subject is not something that we are very interested in. So how do we drive and build our own muscle for curiosity?
Yeah, and I might be repetitive. Firstly, I would say to parents, let your students wonder, let them make mistakes. That's how they'll let them dirty their hands, and that's how they'll learn about the real world. I would say for teachers, I can't say this enough. Ask the right questions. If you ask the right questions, you'll get the what you want. But if you don't, then you'll mechanical skills. And I would say educators and all the stakeholders, including the students themselves, just challenge yourself, try and see how it could be different rather than, and that's what we ask them to do to us educators, to challenge us. Ask us, why have I asked the wrong question? Have I done something that you did not appreciate? So take feedback from the students. They're the most valuable resource we have. And of course, like I said, don't trust the written word. Explore it for yourself and recognize that it's not just reason or language that helps us understand. It's often emotion. Trust your intuition, believe in your imagination, and all these will lead to this whole process that will make you better learners.
Yeah. So, Vera ma'am, thank you for that. I think I just want to emphasize one thing, that even the ask of asking better questions is a teachable, learnable skill. So I think in the educator space, I mean, I could certainly learn a technique that's better than for asking better questions. And as a coach, of course, we're trained to ask very fine and sophisticated questions to drive better reflection. But I think it's important that educators also see that this is a teachable, learnable skill that they have to continue to build over a period of time, because the way children are disseminating and absorbing knowledge around them has changed radically. So it's almost as if, almost as if we're competing with entertainment as opposed to education. The levels of boredom are much higher than they ever used to be because they already have this information. So the role of the educator, I think, to ask finer and finer questions to get those eyes becoming bigger when something is being said is becoming tougher. But I think it's lifelong learning for everybody to just improve their skill to deliver information and build higher order thinking. I just want to ask you in the end, is there any particular memory of a curious student whose career altered because they sort of were more curious, or any teaching experience that you had that's special to you around curiosity that you want to say towards the end of our chat?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, I can't often think of a specific story, though I love storytelling, and my students know that I'm always telling both personal and others. But I would say, to me, it's just happening every day in the classroom, especially in a theory of knowledge kind of classroom where we are just constantly asking them. In fact, I pulled out a few questions I'm just going to share with you on which
Yeah.
students present. So it says, what role does imagination play in producing knowledge about the world? For example, so a student who's exploring this through real life examples, we're just seeing such interesting things that they come up with in their presentations. Or another one is, does all knowledge impose ethical obligations on those who own it? So where is the ethical obligation on those who produce it, own it, those who understand it? Who's ethically responsible? That generates so much, this is the kind of thing that I would say is happening all the time in many of our classes.
Yeah.
I just want to say that when I think it's definitely teachable. Everybody should have training in asking the right questions as parents and educators. And then the students learn to ask the right questions too. So it helps so much in their adult life too, because as they go into bigger roles, they're going to be asking the questions that will generate good responses.
Ma'am, you're absolutely right. And, the second question that you just talked about, I mean, this is just such a fantastic question. Those who are keepers and builders of knowledge, do they have an ethical responsibility? I mean, we are facing the AI question straight up right now. What are we going to do with AI? And there's a great picture of Oppenheimer and Einstein sitting together. And one always wonders, what was the ownership of the ethics around building the bomb? And just because that knowledge is there. So I think I think question of ethics is critical. Again, only curiosity around knowledge. Just what we build out of our knowledge is as important as what knowledge we own and have and can come up with. It's just been a fascinating conversation. I will, again have a second conversation. This time we will make sure that we discuss another idea that you had talked about in your speech, which fascinated me. One was curiosity, of course, which we've covered. The other was a sense of history, and then, of course, kindness. There are brain implications for both perspective and kindness, and I'm already booking you for those conversations. But this has been an absolutely fantastic conversation, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Vinati. It was my pleasure. Absolutely. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you. Bye-bye. See you.